Normally, when the Democrats in Congress want to pass a bill to give themselves political cover so they can pretend not to be doing the thing everybody knows they're doing, fig leaf bills I like to call them, they usually don't have much trouble getting a sufficient number of useless idiot Republicans to go along with it. And in extreme cases, they might have a useful idiot Republican actually draw up the legislation, as they did with this ridiculous monstrosity of a fake border security bill that just went down to crushing defeat this week, which was written by Mitch McConnell and crying Chuck Schumer. Then McConnell handed it off to Jim Lankford of Oklahoma and told him to go put the lipstick on the pig. And the way it was supposed to work was they'd try to jam the thing through and get it to a floor vote as quickly as possible, hopefully before too many Republicans had bothered actually reading the damn thing, and they would peel off just enough lazy, useful, idiot Republicans to get the thing passed and send it to the House, and then all the Democrats could run to CNN and say, "Hooray, we got a bipartisan border security bill!" Because while they don't love bipartisanship, they actually hate it quite passionately. They do love the appearance of bipartisanship. They love being able to say the word bipartisanship. And normally, there are enough idiot Republicans who haven't read the bill that they are able to do just that. Now, it goes without saying that to call this a border security bill is rather like calling vodka the cure for alcoholism. In point of fact, this was an open borders/Ukraine aid bill that did nothing to enhance border enforcement, that provided $16 billion to add personnel to the illegal alien concierge service we used to call the Border Patrol, so that they could more effectively process border jumpers and send them on their way into the interior of the country, while over 2.5 times that amount, $60 billion to be exact, would have gone to Muscle Shirt Jesus and the Ukes. It also, amazingly, would have actually legalized illegal border crossing, up to a certain number of crossings per day. But the plan got foiled when, for once, most of the Republicans in the Senate actually read the bill and figured out what a big steaming pile of legislative dog shit it was. Now look, I know legislators love to legislate. When you're a professional legislator, there really isn't much you can do except run your mouth on television and pass new law. And for around 2/3 of the Republicans in the Senate, I do believe they actually want to stop the illegal alien invasion that has been unleashed and facilitated by Biden and the enemy saboteur Mayorkas. And I know there are a lot of Americans posing the question, and you've heard me pose it so many times I probably sound like a broken record by now. Why are people who sneak into our country in contravention of our laws still allowed to claim refugee and asylum seeker status? That's a hell of a good question, but there isn't one single Republican in either house of Congress who seems interested in asking it. And so, as it often does, the task falls to people like yours truly. And I hold the answer here in my formerly nicotine-stained fingers. The Cuban Adjustment Act of 1966, passed by the 89th Congress, signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson on 2 December 1966. For its intended purpose, it was a pretty straightforward law that was supported by sizable majorities on both sides of the aisle. The problem was that up until the passage of this law, all asylum claims had to be made at official ports of entry. And obviously, Cuban dissidents who were fleeing from communist tyranny in homemade improvised raft, they didn't really have the option of presenting themselves at an official port of entry. And so, this law stipulated that asylum and refugee claims could be registered by anyone who was currently in U.S. territory, up to and including the territorial waters around the Florida Peninsula. In 1995, President Clinton amended the statute by executive order, which presidents are allowed to do so long as the courts find that the addendum is compatible with the spirit and the letter of the original law, which stated that prospective refugees and asylees had to set one foot on U.S. soil in order to have their claim registered. Otherwise, they would be returned to their country of origin. They called it the wet foot, dry foot policy. Dry foot, you get to register your claim. Wet foot, you get sent back to Cuba. The problem was that Cuban boat people would make it into U.S. territorial waters, and then they would sit there and wait to be rescued by the Coast Guard, which we were then required to do under the terms of our own statute. And this created a lot of hazardous situations, both for the Cubans themselves and for the American personnel who were required to go and render them aid. So the wet foot, dry foot policy stipulated that, nah, guys, you've got to do the work yourselves and row all the way to the coast. No more free trips from the Coast Guard. And the wet foot, dry foot policy remained in place until President Barack Obama rescinded it in January of 2017 on his very very last full day in office. Could there possibly be some sort of ulterior motive at play here, I wonder? Now, everybody understood when this law was passed back in '66 that it was only supposed to apply to Cuban dissidents and refugees escaping by boat and by raft, but nobody thought to write it into the wording of the statute that it only applies to the southern coast of Florida. And so when they got into office in early 2021, Biden and the enemy saboteur Mayorkas, who would have been intimately familiar with this law, being himself the offspring of Cuban immigrants, they said, you know what? That's a nice big loophole they left in the wording of this law. What say we drive a Mack truck through it? And boy did they. Fleets of Mack trucks, in fact, one after the other, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for upwards of 3 years in a row now. And with the wet foot, dry foot policy having been conveniently wiped off the books, that means for illegal aliens crossing into Texas, they only have to make it to the U.S. side of the Rio Grande and shout out the magic words, and they've won the fucking lottery. Welcome to America. Please feel free to suckle from the teat of the welfare state for the rest of your natural-born life. So in literal technical terms, it's not even correct to say the opening of the border by Biden and the enemy saboteur Mayorkas is a lawless act. Is it underhanded? Sure. Dishonest? Sure. Destructive to the country and its people? Sure. But the actual blame lies with the 89th Congress for not putting more rigid stipulations in the original act 58 years ago. The amazing thing really is that it took the Democrats this long to start exploiting the loophole. You want to talk about root causes of the border crisis? There it is. You want to talk about legislative solutions? There it is. The Republicans had 2 full years between 2017 and 2019 when they controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency. They easily could have repealed the Cuban Adjustment Act and denied the ability of a future Democrat president to do the exact thing that is being done right now. And right up to the present day, how many times have we heard Republicans even broach the subject? Well, that's a big fat zero, ladies and gentlemen.